Sundance Books and Music. My name is Emily Bennett. I'm the events coordinator here. Today we are thrilled to welcome Thomas Lloyd Qualls as he presents his new book, Painted Oxen. If you would like to purchase his book, it is available at the front counter. We are proud to be able to support local authors like Thomas with events such as this, and we are able to do that in partnership with Nevada Humanities and the Nightingale Family Foundation. Thomas Lloyd Qualls is an award-winning author who lives right here in northern Nevada. He has been a copywriter, a licensed attorney, a video storyteller, and a world traveler. You can find his work at tlqonline.com. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Lloyd Qualls.
Wow. What do you guys want to talk about? Big thanks to Sundance for hosting this, for Oliver X for all of the work that he's done in promoting. Oliver, the one person who knows almost everyone in town. And for all of you for showing up. Oh, also, there's snacks in the back provided by Creme, and Peter Burge brought some wine. Peter, who's the distributor?
Encore Beverage.
Encore Beverage. And Tali provided authentic Indian chai to go with the theme of the novel. So when we're done with this part, feel free to help yourself to any of that. So I'm going to set up the novel just a little bit. For those of you who haven't read it or don't know anything about it, despite how much I talk about it. And then I'll do a little bit of reading. I'll do some excerpts, and maybe it'll be a little bit like listening to a folk singer. I'll talk in between them. And then my goal is to not read for more than 15 minutes or something, and we can do Q&A and all of that afterwards if you want. I was advised to read just enough to get you interested, but not enough to where you started looking at your watches. So I'm going to try to find that sweet spot. The book is, the novel is a story of two personal pilgrimages. One of them is an older monk who is seeking sacred valley that's known to bring enlightenment upon entering. The other one is a young man backpacking through India, kind of lost and just trying to find a foothold, some kind of meaning in life, like you do. And the two journeys are separated by centuries and by distance. One's in Tibet, one's in India, but they are tied together somehow. And the vehicle that I used for that was a dream sequence that goes in between each of the stories. So for some reason, when I write a book, it's kind of unconventional in its structure. So this story goes back and forth between the monk and the backpacker, and then, as I said, in between is this sort of connective tissue of these dream vignettes. And then that weren't quite enough, so I squared the set of four by introducing each kind of piece of the story with an archetype from the tarot. So I'll read different excerpts of each and give you a little bit of flavor of each. The other thing that you'll notice is that, and again, this just is the way that it comes out of me, each of the different stories are told in a different voice. So the monk's story is told in the third person, because in my mind, a monk is never going to tell his own story. So that needs to be a different voice. The backpackers is told in first person because, of course, that's all backpackers do is tell their own travel stories. And then the dream sequence is told in second person, which is you, because you are the dreamer. So I'll begin with with the tarot card, the archetype that starts this whole thing off. The story is told kind of in the tradition of the hero's journey, that at some point in our lives we all have to go out in search of something bigger than ourselves. And in the tarot, in the 22 major arcana, this begins with the Fool. And they actually call it the Fool's journey instead of the hero's journey. But it's the exact same thing. It's the Fool setting out for the sacred mountain. The Fool. The first and unnumbered of the major arcana is the Fool. He is leaving the spiritual mountain and, with naive purity, is about to step off a cliff and embark upon an epic adventure. The Fool's journey. He will travel through the gates of the divine wisdom on his way. This is so even though the purpose of the Fool's journey is to find the sacred mountain from which he came. He must leave so he can return. The other thing that I did is I titled the monk stories and the backpacker stories as Scylla and Charybdis. For those who don't get that reference, it's Homer's Odyssey, Homer's the trek, which was a hero's journey in itself, in which he has to go through this one part of the great river in which on one side is a dragon with a multi-headed thing, and another side is like a whirlpool with teeth, and one of them is called Scylla and one of them is called Charybdis. So this is kind of also a tip of the hat to one of my favorite books ever, The Razor's Edge, which comes from a Upanishad verse that the path to salvation is narrow and as difficult to traverse as the edge of a razor. So this is Scylla. The monk awakes from a dream to the sound of rain. The dream is one he has had before. In it, he is not dressed in his traditional robes, but in a manner he does not recognize. He is a much younger man on a long journey far from home, and he is lost. The young man set out on his adventure with noble intentions to discover higher truths about himself and the universe. Though now, cut loose from all that is familiar, he has begun to wander without purpose, and he is near despair. The young wanderer is looking for an answer to a question he has not yet asked. While he travels, he meets many people, each of whom has wisdom to share. But because the young man is looking for a grand treasure, he cannot see the small gifts he finds along the way. As such, he does not yet understand the true nature of the universe. At one time or another, we are all called to leave the safety of our homes, the certainty of what we know, the illusion of who we are. Not everyone will heed this call, of course, and those who do will risk losing themselves completely. But if we choose to ignore the invitation, we risk never knowing who we might have become. The monk too has left his home, though he travels not from city to city, but through far more inhospitable territory, over mountains, across valleys, beside river gorges, along sheer cliffs. He wears little more than his saffron robes. What land and stream cannot provide for him in order to survive, he carries on his back. The sound he hears as he awakes in his shelter, nothing more than a woolen robe stretched between low-lying tree limbs, signals the 8th straight day of torrential rains. He seeks the hidden heart of the world. This journey is his life's work, and he must be disciplined. Unlike the younger man in his dream, the monk must resist the urge to wander. He must not allow himself to become lost, and he must not succumb to the allure of despair. He must protect the spark of truth that lives inside him. Prometheus stole fire from the gods. We are the heirs of that divine spark. Used wisely, the spark fuels one's journey and lights the way. Treated carelessly, the spark consumes its owner and everything in its path. So this is an excerpt from The Backpacker then. Life moves, but it's hard to say in what direction. Maybe it only crosses dimension. Maybe nothing is linear. Maybe all is perfectly still, and there is only the traverse of the mind in a spiral through parallel worlds. Maybe what we see is only a trick of the brain. Maybe time only exists because of clocks, their hands moving around a fixed center to keep us focused, aging. Or maybe it's all a dream. I wake up as the plane touches down in the dark at Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi. There's nothing like air travel to scramble context. Climb inside a giant metal tube in one world and step out hours later into a completely different reality. It's a lot like dreaming, but in reverse. In a dream, it's the dream world that is foreign, even if it makes some sense while you're there. But then you wake up to a familiar world. But when you travel to the other side of the planet, the world you wake up in is the one that doesn't make sense. Absolutely everything is different. The people, their clothes, their voices, and their skin. The streets are not recognizable, nor the vehicles and buildings that line them. The air you breathe smells and feels different, and there are even colors that never cross borders. I was told by others who had been here that nothing could prepare me for India. So if air travel is crossing dimensions, going to India, it seems, is traveling through time. Here is another example of the archetypes that frame the following kind of trio. This is called La Luna. Number 18 in the major arcana is called La Luna, the moon. The moon rises between two towers, one light and one dark. In the foreground, the moon is reflected in a pool of water. A path leads from the water, winding between the towers and into the mountains in the background. Near the water, on either side of the path, a dog and a wolf bay at the moon. The subconscious holds many valuable secrets. The reflections on the surface of the water are often mistaken for the mysteries that lie beneath. Likewise, the reflection of the moon itself is mistaken for its own light. In this quest for wisdom, each person must emerge from the illusions of the world and begin the journey towards their own sacred mountain. Here's the monk again. From time to time, the world finds itself broken. At these times, all the magic that came before gets packed away, and those who carry it from place to place batten things down. What is left explodes into a billion tiny stars, and the light and the dark lose their separateness once more. A space opens up during this time, a space held by the arms of eternity. In this time and space, in this corridor of eternity, the ants move. The monk knows something of their task. Sometimes a journey is not about the traveler. It is not about a destination. It is about the bringing together of worlds. It is about lighting a path. The ants journey not because of hunger, not to escape the rains, not driven by instinct or survival. They travel because they know the underworld. They know how to cross dimensions. They live between the worlds. Darkness becomes them, and they are not afraid of the light. They are the carriers of the thread. When the world is broken above and below, inside and out, they are charged with mending the wounds in the dark, those left raw by the light. They are charged with building the new world, so we can start again. He follows a thread that looks like theirs, though he is above ground. Though his mission is not to wait until the world ends, but to find a way to the other side before it does. To prop open the door before it can be locked, to tie a suture before the fatal wound is made, to let in the moonlight before the sun is allowed to rise. Here is a dream chapter, they're all titled Preda, which means stolen goods, because that's how I think of dreams. I think of dreams as kind of stuff that you have to smuggle across the border between asleep and awake. And this speaks of a goddess who is kind of a guide for both of our travelers and journeyers. You dream of camels, and also of wind and bells and dust and colorful headcloths. The young woman with brilliant hair is here. She walks beside you, her white robe gliding along the dirt road, as if there were a pocket of air between her and the ground. Neither she nor the robe gathers any dirt as she moves along the dusty streets, in and among the camel drivers, speaking in tongues, exchanging coins, occasionally turning her face towards you. She leads a single camel without a rope. Its reins rest loose on its shoulders. The camel's back is covered with a thick wool blanket, faded in color and frayed at the edges. And there are 2 leather saddlebags filled with unknown provisions. You follow her. She leads with grace. She appears neither coy nor aloof, simply knowing, aware. A few strands of her hair are tied with leather strips on either side of her head, and in her left hand is a pouch made of bright blue fabric. She makes her way to a stall on the outskirts of town. You join her at a small table where she is already pouring tea for you. She sets down the pot and then looks up at you. You don't know where you are, only that she is why you are here. You want to know about the camel, she says. She speaks in a matter-of-fact way, but without a trace of arrogance. Somehow she gives you the feeling of being understood, but without even having to speak. After she sips her tea, but before you can answer, or rather, because speaking seems unnecessary, she begins to explain. The camel is the favorite of the high priestess, who is the bridge between the darkness and the light. As the keeper of sacred wisdom, as the goddess of the moon, as the bearer of the crown of Isis, the high priestess requires a vehicle to transport her gifts of abundance from the dream world to this one. Camels are perfect companions for any pilgrimage. They are skilled guides and suited for long and difficult journeys. Also, something happens on the back of a camel. We begin to see things from a different perspective, and a new world opens up for us, one we didn't know existed. She takes another sip of tea and then rises from her chair, gathers the camel's reins slowly, lifting them over the gentle beast's head. When finally you find the courage to speak, you ask feebly where she is headed with her camel. She turns back to you, a look of surprise on her face. The camel is for you, she says, and hands you the reins. Two more. This is the backpacker again. I write with blue pens now, glass pens with little painted blown glass animals on the top. I bought them from a little girl outside the walls of the Taj Mahal. I didn't realize how hard it would be to find pens here. I would have brought more with me. For years I used nothing but black ink. I don't know why. Maybe it just seemed more substantial, made more of a statement. Maybe blue seemed too unsure of itself, like I might as well have been writing with a pencil. Walking away from the Taj, though, there's the usual throng of Indian children trying to sell us any manner of things. This one little girl catches my attention, though, and when I stop to talk to her, I find out she's selling pens. She hands one to me and asks if I want to buy it. I inspect it. It's quite an amazing thing, really, for a place where it's hard to find a pen at all. I joke with her for a minute and pretend to haggle over the price of it. Somewhere in the middle of this, I remember that I actually need pens, and so I buy the whole box. 12 amazing little hand-painted blown glass pens for 10 cents a piece or something ridiculous. So for the moment, I write with blue pens, but they have a story behind them. The story makes the ink more substantial, I think. Okay, last one. This is the backpacker again. I awake in the sand dunes under the full moon to the sound of camels slowly munching. Like so often when traveling, I'm disoriented for a moment. Wait, sand dunes, camels, gigantic moon. I'm dreaming, right? Only one sensation offers an answer to that riddle. Before I went to sleep, the camel walla laid a thick, heavy blanket over me. I can feel its surprising weight on the full length of my body. The blanket is a ballast, grounding me, reminding me I'm resting on the earth and not suspended in the dream world. It acts as an emotional swaddle out here, in the middle of nowhere, cut loose from anything remotely familiar. Lying here, held fast by blanket and bed of sand, I stare up into the heavens in utter amazement at the dramatic beauty of the blue-black sky that acts as a backdrop for the swollen moon, and, despite the brilliant moonlight, more stars than I've ever seen in my life. Okay, except for that time I did acid in the desert. I'm miles from the nearest city, and that city is many miles from anything else. This distance gives me space, not just to see the world with more clarity, but to imagine a place for me in it. Okay, what do you guys want to talk about now?
Good Gatsby.
Francine.
Not like reading Gatsby. Didn't like that book anyway. I haven't read your book yet. Waiting. But I'm wondering, because I read the last book and it felt like the bartender was you in that book. And I'm guessing by the way you're reading that the backpacker was you.
I will, I'm going to give a shout out to my old friend, Bruce Lindsay here, who said once, all fiction is autobiographical and all autobiography is fiction. And I think that's true, that of course we have to gather from our own life experience in whatever way, even if you're not writing about something that has happened to you per se, you have to bring your own life experience and common sense and ideas of humanity into it. So yes, the backpacker story is loosely taken from my own travels in India, but you know, just like in Rembrandt, I was also all of the characters in some way in that. So, Peter?
Now that this is your second book, how would you contrast putting this book together, thinking about it, all the things that you did for this book versus the first book?
The voice deepens and gets better, and you get more sure of what comes out. You're able to, I mean, it sounds odd thing to say, but you're able to hear the voice, and if you write a sentence that isn't true, you're not afraid to scratch it out. The first book I wrote was, it was originally like 550 pages, and it had twice as many storylines in it as it ended up, and I kind of set it down, and then 6 months later or whatever came back to it and cringed and hated it completely. And so I tore it apart, you know, and I reduced down just the only number of, you know, to what it was, its essence. And so that part was harder. I didn't have to do that this time. There's always sifting, and writing is rewriting, and I cannot believe how many times, Russell knows this, how many times you have to read something and revise it and still find mistakes. Linnell knows this, anyone else who writes. So yeah, but I think not that I don't know if that the writing gets easier, but the process gets somewhat easier.
So did some of the stuff that snuck away from the first book and left it after that 6-month cooling off period creep into this book?
That's a really good question. I don't think so. Although that stuff is still hanging around because as Neil Gaiman says, you create a compost heap basically of stuff. And so I don't know that any of that creeped in. What I would say is what is unknown is that in this book, nobody has a name. And again, that's one of the things that just happened. I didn't set out for that to be a gimmick or anything. That's just how it turned out. But Dylan in the first book is actually the backpacker in this book, which if you read for a while, you probably, and you've read the first one, you probably pick up on that, although they never say his name. This is my friend Chewy. I love you, Chewy. Thank you. Chewy has the best tequila in this whole town, so go see him. Say hi. What else? Questions? Anything, really.
I have a question. Have you had your own hero's journey? And the second piece to that is, what can you share with us one of the most profound things you've learned about yourself from writing this book?
Oh my, that's yeah, no, those are. Chewy, do you have more? So the my own hero's journey. Yes, I mean there was one attached to this. I actually traveled to India and lived there for 4 months and traveled around and learned many things that I'm still processing from that very layered experiences. One of the things that I learned was that I learned that I had to go to India in order to find out that I didn't have to go to India to find answers. And yet, it was invaluable. I think that a lot of us have several hero's journeys that we go on in life. I mean, in some ways, I just got back from a short one with my friends Ira and Baldo, who are here. We have a ranch down in Paraguay that I had never been to, and so I just did that for 9 days. And for 3 years, I've been making plans to go, and then something would happen, and I didn't go, and I finally kind of removed those blocks and went, and had several profound things happen to me there that may or may not end up in material one day. Another thing that I will say, and hopefully it doesn't go too much to his head because he's sitting here, but I might need more tequila. Being a parent. Is a profound journey. I could talk more about that, but I'll probably cry. So I was there. I caught him. I cut the cord. I looked into his eyes, and that isn't. I'm gonna wait for a minute on that one, Chewy. Thank you.
In a few years, you'll need a lot more tequila.
Thanks. Sorry about that. And then, what was the second part of your question?
If you'd like, if you are inspired to answer a profound realization you've had about yourself as a result of writing the book.
So there's an alchemist that appears in the dream sequence that that ties a theme through the entire book, and that theme is that in order to affect any, it's that as inside so outside thing. In order to affect any change in our physical external lives, there's an alchemy of the heart that has to happen first. And so that's one of the secrets in alchemy that you really never hear about. It's all, you always hear about the external, that the alchemist transforms this metal into gold somehow through, you know, these 18 steps or through this process. And what I found out in studying alchemy, which really provided just the perfect thread for the novel, is that it is the alchemist that has to undergo the transformation, and that it's the transmutation of the heart that is everything, and the gold is just a byproduct of that. And so that's really the heart of the hero's journey, really. If you go on a hero's journey and you're expecting something to show up from the outside world, but you're not willing to undergo the change yourself, then it's not going to happen. So all changes happen inside and then are manifest outside. That second part was easier for me to get through, so.
It was the tequila.
It was the tequila and the comfort of knowing that this one's still sitting here. What else? Nobody's asked about the title.
Well, I wasn't going to ask.
No, no, please.
I'm curious about the creative process. I had read in a book, I think it's called Big Magic, where she describes the idea of a novel coming as like its own entity, like its own little life that wants to come into the world, and if you don't respond, it's going to go somewhere else. So I'm just wondering if you experience it as its own living being.
Are you talking about Elizabeth Gilbert?
Yeah.
Elizabeth Gilbert is brilliant. If you guys haven't seen it, go YouTube it right now. Elizabeth Gilbert, is it in one of her TED Talks? It must be.
In one of her books.
But I think it's in a TED Talk as well, where she talks about the elusive creative genius. It's a TED Talk that she gave after what she calls freakish success of Eat, Pray, Love. And she talks about being faced with a daunting kind of task of knowing that her best, most popular work is probably behind her, and yet being relatively young and still wanting to do this for the rest of her life and not wanting to just wake up and drink gin first thing in the morning. And so she talked about creative genius, and it used to be that we considered a genius to be like this thing that visited you, this external entity that visited you and allowed you to do your task. And then all writers, at least that I've heard talk about this, but I think any artist talks about, you kind of tap into something. It's a channel that you it's not like I had all of these words in my brain and then so there is some sort of creative flow that you tap into. And one of the things she was talking about was like the pressure of having to like take responsibility for that genius to be you, which is how that's how we describe it and talk about it now, is that you're a genius, not that you have a genius. And I think she used Tom Waits, who doesn't want to use Tom Waits as an example for whatever, but she used Tom Waits as he was driving down the road, and he's in LA in traffic, and this melody comes to him, and he has nothing to write on, and he can't just stop because it's a crowded highway, and he says, "Can't you see that I'm busy?" and then I'll try to wrap the answer. She wraps it up cause I'm just channeling her right now. She wraps it up neatly in talking about the whirling dervishes in northern Africa. When you catch that spirit, that genius, that whatever it is that hits you, everyone knows. And they start spinning and everyone stands around and they say, Allah, 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 saying, this is God or the light or whatever has possessed this person. And then that somehow went across the Mediterranean into Spain and became ole, ole, ole to the, what's the dancers? The flamenco, yes. And so, her point was, your job is just to show up and allow a space for genius to be there. And it's a relationship, it really is. It's not, and the best thing you can do is get out of the way and just let it happen, I think. Trying to force anything is not. It's like the sentence that doesn't work and you go, yeah, but I really like that, I want to keep it. Just cross it out and go on. What else?
Tell us about these painted oxen.
Thank you, Jerry. Actually, there's a passage in the book that I could read. This is again in the dream sequence, and the red-haired goddess is there. The red-haired woman leads a young ox along the top of the high fortress wall in front of you. Like the other oxen on the wall, including the one you are leading, her ox is an illusion. The beast itself is real enough, as are the colors of paint on its sides, the rope she uses to lead it, and the wall itself. Still, these things are not what they seem. Your prosperous village is under siege from an ambitious rival. It is a desirable conquest because of its rich soil, abundant water, and thriving trade. By painting the oxen and parading them atop the fortress walls like this, the villagers show defiance to their attackers. The painted oxen say without speaking, "You will not starve us out." As the battle wages on, though, the village's abundance has begun to wane, and with rations becoming exhausted and the number of oxen dwindling, the woman with red hair appears at the base of the wall and gestures you down. With a pail of water and a cloth, and without explanation, she begins scrubbing the paint off the sides of your ox. She pats it dry and starts to paint a new design on it using different pigments. You continue to walk the remaining oxen along the high walls as before, but to hide their dwindling numbers, after each one is displayed, you and the other villagers quickly wash it, paint it with different colors, and parade it again. This has become a full-time endeavor, as important as fighting the actual battle. Eventually, the illusion works, and the attacking army retreats in defeat, suffering starvation and unsustainable losses of its own. Things are often not what they seem, and then sometimes they are. The trick is to learn what's real. Thank you, Jerry, for taking that bait. I had it tagged and everything. Oliver.
Question about, there's maybe some people in here who are preparing their first manuscript or aspiring to be novelists. Talk about the process and the patience it takes to hang in there so long to get your first book deal. And talk about what that process was like for you.
Right, yeah, it's kind of a masochistic profession. It's really one of those things where if you are compelled to write or paint or dance or play music or whatever, you just have to do it. And the only way, so when I used to be a pretty avid rock climber, and I would ask all of the guys who had, written the guidebooks and everything that I was climbing with, like how to get better, and they all just said the only way to get better at climbing is to climb. And so it's exactly the same thing. The only way to fully step into your voice as a writer is just to keep writing. And I mean, you know this, of course, and it's incredibly helpful. For 6+ years, Oliver gave me a forum once a month to write. And it didn't have anything to do with the novel, but just the practice of having to sit down and write and have an actual deadline. Because when you're writing a novel, unless somebody has given you an advance, there is no deadline. I mean, this took me 8 years or more to produce in fits and starts, right? Because you don't just do it. But that's one of the things that that helped continue to develop my voice, is because I had to just keep showing up and using it. And that's there are no shortcuts. You should Google Neil Gaiman's advice on this as well, because he has I can't even repeat it. It's a brilliant thing in which a young writer asked him about, it's so hard. Like, how do you know, isn't there? He was like, sure, you know, there's two ways. You can just write and write and write and write and write and write and write until you have gotten there, right? Or you can do this weird thing where he was like, you can climb up to this, you know, on the 3rd full moon of the year, up to this nest and take this egg and keep it in your mouth for 3 days. And, you know, this whole like crazy thing. And then, you know, this thing that's impossible and you would never do. So, yeah, the thing is you've got to develop. You've got to write, number one, and just keep writing and keep writing and keep writing and keep writing, and not be ashamed of the fact that sometimes you look at it and go, this is terrible. Because every writer worth their salt has had that thought many times. And then the other thing is you've got to just keep sending it out. I mean, the story with this is ridiculous. I spent forever, it feels like, reaching out to, researching, doing queries, sending synopses to agents, and then to publishers, traditional publishers, small and large, until this happened. And if the work is good, eventually it will find a home. You just have to be persistent, and you have to get it in front of people who get it and who that's their thing, and they'll take a chance on it. There you go. And call me and I'll tell you the same thing. Keep writing. Who else? Anybody? Anything?
I'll throw something out there. Without giving too much of the book away, did you have an intended message or something that you want the reader when you close the book for them to walk away with?
What I want is for this to be I want this to be like a fingerprint. I want this to be your journey. I want you to take your own journey with this. I want people to come as Oliver did. I keep praising Oliver, but it's deserved, because without Oliver reading it and coming to me and saying this, and Oliver reads a ton, and he came to me and he said, this is it. He said, this is brilliant. And the thing that he said that really kind of turned the key for me, he said, I'm a different person than I was when I picked up this book. And so that's what I want for everyone. I want you to get whatever message you get out of it, and I in no way want to kind of determine that.
So how can people spread the word about Painted Oxen?
Thank you for asking that. The two things that I've discovered, one of them is that despite technology and everything, and even with the use of technology, you could do this, but word of mouth is the thing that makes an artist, you know, especially a writer. So if you read it, if you like it, tell your friends, buy them Christmas presents, do whatever, spread it out. That's how Paulo Coelho had written 2 books. One of them was called The Pilgrimage, and the second one was called The Alchemist. He's written dozens since then, but nobody read him. And he remained relatively unknown. He had like an agent, I think, who just really believed in him and kept pushing it. And then he had a small niche of people who really connected to The Alchemist and started sharing it. And it was one of those things like, what was that shampoo commercial a long time ago? Jerry, can you help me? And you tell 2 friends, and you tell 2 friends, and you, right?
Gee, your hair smells terrific.
It's something like that, yeah. But that's how, and that's what catapulted him into the, he's like in 61 countries or something right now. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, for good or bad, Amazon controls the market, and Amazon reviews are everything. So if you read it and you like it, go post an Amazon review and encourage other people to do the same. That's just the reality of this. The truth is that while I love this and I love connecting to you, mostly what I want to do is just write books. And yet the way the market is, we're just forced to also. I read something the other day that says you've got to be a writer and an author, and the author is the guy that is out there marketing and doing social media and doing events and promoting that. But there's absolutely, because I tried with my first one, there's absolutely no way that on your own any artist can do any of this, whether you're a painter or writer or what. You need other people to champion it. So that's really the best thing you can do, not just for me, but for anyone that you like and that you want to promote. Because, man, this is a big deal that Mallory and a bunch of us have had this conversation about, Anisha. Sustainability in the arts right now. That is a thing that if you care about that, do what you can to promote that, because it's big. And it's the only way that things are that the good art is going to survive, is making it sustainable, and so that we don't have to keep working 3 jobs while we do this. That was a very long answer, but thank you for the question. Anything?
Hashtag that we should know?
Hashtag Painted Oxen. I don't know. My publisher is using Live the Journey right now, and actually, if you order from them and use Live the Journey, you get like 20% off everything. So there's that.
You should probably buy it here today.
Yes.
Or Sundance, of course. And again, I will say that this. Sundance is remarkable in that it survived, first the sort of Borders and Barnes & Noble domination of everything, and it has survived Amazon. And it's because people like us can need to continue to come here and support them, and it's symbiotic. They continue to support authors by doing this. So. So yes, I will. If any other questions, I'm happy to answer. Or if you want to come up, when you come up and I sign the book, we can chat more then. So there's also, again, wine, chai from Tali, and snacks from Creme. Thanks to Tim and Beth Carter. Da-da-da.
Give me some love, Brad. That's you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for
Feel free to hang out, we can chat, whatever. I know you've got things to do.